Okay, so I found in my research about verbs used for preparing food that the Torah progresses slowly from a very simple word, the verb to make, and it's actually in three separate verses, one after the other. When the three angels come to visit Abraham, he says to Sarah, knead and make cakes. If he was talking English, he should have said bake cakes, but it's very, very different verb. It's asi, just general word for make. Then it says that he went to the pen and to the herd, and he got a young calf. And again, vayamaher la'asovato, that he made it, or the boy made it. We don't know for sure. Gemara in Chulin actually talks about shchita of a non-Jew, but Avram at this time wasn't Jewish either, so it was just to discuss what kind of level of kosher he had. And then last, he took the butter and the milk and the calf, and again, asa, and they ate it. In the next chapter, in chapter 19, when Lot hosts two of the three angels, um, we suddenly hear of a much improved verb. And so it says that he begged them or urged them to come to him, and then he made for them a banquet, and he baked matzah or unleavened bread, and they ate. So here is the first time in the Torah that there's a specific verb for preparation of food. Then the next one is 20 chapters later, where it talks about the butler and the baker. What I found even more interesting is that in verse 10, um, because it's the first person speaking is the butler, that we have the verb bet shin lamed, bishul, of cooking, like we talked about yesterday, but it has nothing to do with cooking. It has to do about the ripening of the grapes. So maybe that's why the rabbis took that verb as a more appropriate general word for preparation of food on Shabbat, because it doesn't matter in what form. We have to recognize, are we doing something that is changing the form of the food or not? And based on that, is it considered bishul or not, which will be the topic today. And just general principles specifically about bishul. And then tomorrow for the next 10 classes, Halacha Gimel to Yud Gimel, 3 to 13, we'll discuss the different parameters of which cooking is considered rabbinical and biblical, etc. And last but not least, when people in Egypt are told about how they're going to prepare the Paschal lamb, it says that they should eat the meat at this night roasted over the fire. So tzli esh, tzala is again another verb, but it specifically says al tochlu minenu, do not eat from it when it's raw, and also not bashel mevushal b'mayim, but also not when it's surely cooked in water. The repetition is sometimes to emphasize, sometimes any meaning to say that any kind of way that is cooked other than roasting. And that's why the Torah repeats again, it must be roasted completely. So those are the times the first times that these different verbs are mentioned in the Torah, and so I thought that that would be interesting to explain how bishul ended up being the primary word that we use. So Rabbi Lamed says the following: Bishul is the malacha that prepares or improves food, whether through seething, baking, or roasting. What defines this malacha is that food is prepared by means of fire's heat, and we'll see that that's not always the case. The food is softened by the heat, and the tastes within it merge to create a new taste, which is intense and contains a variety of flavors. So we also have a prohibition of not eating ever min achai, eating even if it's roasted. You're not allowed to cut off a limb of a living animal, but the idea that there's a new taste and it's improved, that's why we have the process of cooking, like we talked about yesterday. We could have eaten technically a lot of things raw, but we still choose to heat them or to do other things with them in order to make them taste even better. Cooking initially softens food, and most foods remain soft after cooking. After cooked, however, there are some foods that harden in the course of cooking, like eggs. Similarly, the process of roasting softens the food at first, but eventually makes it a little bit tougher. Again, it depends if you want it medium rare, well done, etc. Torah law prohibits cooking, and this prohibition even includes foods that can be eaten raw if cooking improves them in some way. For example, although one can certainly drink cold water, nevertheless, since cooking improves the water, doing so is prohibited by Torah law. How does it improve the water? It doesn't actually improve the taste, but apparently a warm drink for your throat in the winter is much better than a cold drink, and so that's a very basic explanation. Cooking foods that are not improved by this process is not prohibited by Torah law, but it is still prohibited rabbinically. One who cooks using fire or something that was heated by fire, what's called toldot ha'esh, meaning the result of a fire, transgresses a Torah prohibition. Therefore, if one heats a frying pan on the fire, then turns off the fire or removes it from the fire and fries an egg in the hot frying pan, he has transgressed a Torah prohibition. This is the case even though the pan was no longer on the fire during the actual frying. So we're not going into the prohibition of blowing out the fire or turning off the fire. We're just saying that even if it was just removed, this is a Torah prohibition. Any accepted forms of cooking is prohibited by Torah law, meaning not shinui. Therefore, one who cooks in a microwave transgresses the Torah prohibition because nowadays this is one of the normal ways of cooking. Before we explain the laws of Bishul in detail, we will preface them by saying that there are three types and levels of prohibitions relevant to Bishul. First one is Bishul by Torah law. Second is rabbinic enactments that forbid doing anything that might cause someone to turn up a flame. So that's the chatot begachalin, literally to steer the coals, and rabbinic enactments that forbid doing anything that resembles cooking. So that will be marit ayin and zilzul Shabbat and other kinds of forms where people see what you're doing and they think that you're cooking. So to determine whether one may do a particular action, they must examine it from these three perspectives. To elaborate, one must clarify if this action is forbidden because it qualifies as bishul. Any action that leads to food's transformation from a raw state to a cooked state is prohibited by Torah law. If you remember, we had mentioned yesterday in passing the hot baths and hot springs, and the rabbis considered that instead of toldot ha'esh, the result of fire, they call that toldot chama, the result of celestial being like the sun or other kind of changes of the heat, lava. I don't think anybody will go and take an egg to lava, but that would be considered toldot chama as opposed to toldot esh. This prohibition and those deriving from it will be explained in halachas 3 to 13, like I said. From the perspective of the Torah prohibition of bishul, one may leave food on the fire when Shabbat begins with the intention that it will continue cooking on Shabbat. However, the sages prohibit doing so when it may be necessary to adjust the heat due to the concern that one may forget it is Shabbat and turn up the flame, thus transgressing the Torah prohibitions of Mav'ir and Bishul. But if the fire is covered, as it is in the case of a hot plate or warming tray, one may place food on it because there is no chance that he will forget it is Shabbat and turn up the flame. Usually hot plates are for the sole purpose of Shabbat, and that's why it is permissible. We're not going to get into the different levels of liquid or solid. It will be discussed later on. And the third consideration is even if the food is fully cooked and thus there is no concern that one will turn up the flame, the sages still forbid doing anything that looks like cooking. Therefore, one may not put fully cooked cold food directly on the fire. However, one may put such food far from the heat source in such a way that it does not look like cooking. As we will explain in halachos 18 to 21, there is a disagreement whether placing food on a plata looks like cooking and is thus forbidden, and so we'll get to that again in terms of if it's permissible for Ashkenazim, Sephardim, or Yemenites, and that will be the change. Just before we conclude, I want to say that there was a level that's called Ma'achal Ben Drosai, the food of a known highwayman or bandit of the time of Chazal when they wrote these halachos. And apparently, because he was always on the run, he would wait only until the meat was a third cooked, so very, very raw. And so it will be, we'll see how it's considered a leniency if something is put onto the fire on Friday, way before Shabbat, but only gets to that level of a third of the food of this bandit. And so we'll stop here and we'll open for questions.